The word sushi does not mean raw fish. It has never meant raw fish. In Japanese, sushi has exactly one meaning: soured rice. Rice seasoned with vinegar. That's it. The fish, the crab, the avocado, all of it is just a topping. Take away the rice, and you don't have sushi anymore. You have something else entirely. And here's the other thing nobody tells you. Sushi did not start in Japan. It started in the jungles of Southeast Asia, somewhere along the Mekong River, in what is now Laos, Thailand, and Myanmar, at a time when the one thing people desperately wanted to avoid was eating raw fish. Because raw fish goes bad, fast. So the question wasn't how to eat it raw. The question was how to keep it from killing you. And the answer to that question, worked out over centuries, passed through China, carried across the sea to Japan, eventually became one of the most recognized foods on Earth. Here's how it happened. Nare-zushi, the original sushi nobody would touch today. The first sushi wasn't a delicate piece of fish on a pillow of warm rice. It was closer to something you'd find in the back of a very old refrigerator and immediately throw out. The process went like this. You took a whole fish, carp, trout, whatever you could catch, and you packed it in salt and rice. Then you put a heavy stone on top to press out the moisture. Then you waited. Not days, not weeks, months, sometimes years. What came out the other end was called nare-zushi. The rice had gone soft and sour from fermentation. The fish had been completely preserved by salt and thyme. The smell, and people who've eaten it will tell you this, is somewhere between aged Roquefort cheese and something that washed up on a beach. The rice, by the way, was thrown away. Nobody ate it. The whole point was the fish. This was the Nara period, roughly 710 to 794 AD. And nare-zushi was not street food. It was not a quick lunch. It was a luxury item that required months of labor, significant amounts of salt, and enough storage space to press fish under rocks for half a year. Only the imperial court and the highest levels of the aristocracy could afford it. The dish actually appears in the Engishiki, a 10th century book of Japanese imperial laws and customs, listed as a form of tribute that commoners were required to deliver to the palace. One version of it still exists today. In Shiga Prefecture, near Japan's largest freshwater lake, a restaurant still makes funazushi using the ancient method. They take funa carp from Lake Biwa, salt it, pack it in rice, and let it ferment for 1 to 3 years. When it's done, the rice has almost completely dissolved into a paste. The flavor is complex and sharp, and deeply funky, in a way that takes some people completely off guard. It's considered one of the oldest continuously prepared foods in Japan. Most visitors try a small piece and immediately understand why sushi evolved away from it. Because eventually, the people of Japan grew tired of waiting, especially in the cities, especially in Osaka. Oshizushi, when Osaka got impatient. Osaka has always had a reputation in Japan. It's a merchant city, a business city, a city where people move fast, talk fast, and do not have much patience for anything that takes a year to prepare. So somewhere around the Muromachi period, the 1300s and 1400s, people started shortening the fermentation. Weeks instead of months. Then days instead of weeks. The rice became edible again. The fish was no longer cured into something barely recognizable. You could actually taste what you were eating. But there was still a problem. The fish sat on top of loose rice, which made it hard to store and harder to transport. Osaka merchants needed something they could pack into a box, carry across a city, hand to a customer, and have it still look presentable when the lid came off. The solution was a wooden mold about the size of a shoebox. You pressed layers of rice and fish together inside it, tightly, evenly, with your hands or a wooden press, then unmolded it and sliced it into neat rectangular pieces. Each slice showed clean, layered colors. It looked almost architectural. It was called oshizushi, which simply means pressed sushi. One of the most famous versions was called batera. It used salted mackerel, a fish with a strong flavor that holds up well under pressure, laid over a thin slice of cucumber, all pressed together into that same rectangular form. The name batera, oddly enough, comes from the Portuguese word for a small boat. Portuguese traders had a significant presence in Japan during this era, and apparently, someone thought the pressed shape looked like a little vessel. Batera became the food of Osaka's merchant class. Practical, portable, presentable. You could buy it at a stall, eat it walking, and still feel like you were eating something worth paying for. But Osaka was only half the story. 300 miles east, in the city of Edo, what we now call Tokyo, something even faster was happening. Nigiri, Tokyo's answer to fast food. In 1824, a man named Hanaya Yohei set up a food stall on the banks of the Sumida River in Edo and did something that nobody had done before. He made sushi to order. Right there. In seconds, he'd take a small handful of vinegared rice, about 20 grams, roughly the size of a golf ball, press it into an oval shape between his palms, lay a slice of fresh fish on top, and hand it to the customer. The whole process took maybe 10 seconds. The customer ate it standing at the stall, paid, and walked away. This was nigiri, and it was the first real fast food in Japanese history, more than a century before McDonald's opened its first location in the United States. The Edo period city was crowded, loud, and always in motion. Workers, traders, fishermen, rickshaw drivers, nobody wanted to sit down for a formal meal. Hanaya Yohei understood that. He brought the sushi to the street. The word nigiri, by the way, means 2 fingers, a reference to the way the rice is shaped by pressing it between 2 thumbs. Now here is the part of the nigiri story that almost nobody knows. The most prestigious topping in the world of nigiri today, the one that shows up on every list of luxury sushi, the one that chefs describe as melting on your tongue like butter, is fatty bluefin tuna. And for most of Japanese history, bluefin tuna was considered garbage. Not an exaggeration. The Japanese had a word for it, neko mazaragi. It roughly translates to the fish that even cats step over. Bluefin was oily. It was dark red. The meat was considered too heavy, too strong-smelling, too fatty for a dish that was supposed to be clean and delicate. When fishermen caught bluefin tuna, which is a massive animal, sometimes over 1,000 pounds, they'd sometimes give the whole thing away for free just to get rid of it. In the mid-20th century, American sport fishermen in the North Atlantic were catching bluefin tuna for the sheer fight of it, photographing themselves next to the fish, and then dumping the carcasses back in the water or grinding them into cat food. That was the market for bluefin tuna, cat food. What changed everything was World War II. After Japan's surrender in 1945, American forces occupied the country, and American forces brought American eating habits with them, specifically a taste for rich, fatty, strongly flavored food, beef, butter, heavy protein. Over the following years, as Japanese people were exposed to these flavors, their palates shifted. The preference for delicate, light, clean fish began to share space with an appetite for something richer. Bluefin tuna, fatty, dense, intensely flavored, suddenly made more sense to the Japanese tongue than it ever had before. By the 1970s, a single high-quality cut of bluefin belly, called otoro, had become the most coveted topping in sushi. And in January 2019, at the annual New Year's auction at Tokyo's Toyosu Fish Market, a 278-kilogram bluefin tuna sold for $3.1 million. The buyer was the owner of the Sushiro restaurant chain. He didn't need the fish that badly. He needed the publicity. But nigiri had one limitation that nobody had solved. Some toppings, soft, wet, runny toppings, simply would not stay on top of a piece of rice. They slid off. They rolled away. And in 1941, a chef in Tokyo came up with a fix that was so simple it seems obvious in retrospect, and named it after a battleship. Gunkan, the battleship that changed the menu. The restaurant was called Kyubei, in the Ginza district of Tokyo, and the chef had a problem. Ikura, salmon roe, those bright orange spheres that pop on your tongue, was wildly popular. But when you put a spoonful of ikura on top of a nigiri rice ball, about half of it immediately rolled off onto the counter. There was no way to hold it in place. You couldn't press it down without crushing it. The solution took about 2 minutes to think of, and has been used in every sushi restaurant on Earth ever since. The chef took a strip of nori, dried seaweed, and wrapped it around the outside of the rice ball, leaving the top open like a little cup. The seaweed acted as a wall. The ikura sat inside the wall, perfectly contained, going nowhere. He called it gunkan, which is the Japanese word for warship. Look at a piece of gunkan from above and you'll understand immediately. It looks exactly like a small vessel with a hull and a cargo hold. The invention of gunkan didn't just solve the ikura problem. It opened up an entire category of sushi that hadn't existed before. Sea urchin, uni, with its rich, oceanic, almost custard-like texture, became a gunkan staple. Tobiko, the tiny, crunchy flying fish roe that pops between your teeth, became another. These are now among the most expensive items at any sushi counter, and they all exist on a plate because one chef in 1941 didn't want his salmon roe sliding onto the tablecloth. Quick note about uni, since it tends to either convert people or terrify them. Sea urchin is often described as the gold of the ocean. When it's fresh, it has a creamy, oceanic sweetness. People compare it to a very clean oyster, crossed with the ocean itself. A single piece, at a high-end Tokyo counter, can cost $30 to $50. And here's the detail that tends to surprise people. Roughly 95% of the sea urchin consumed in Japan is actually imported from California and Maine. The Pacific coast of the United States is, quietly, one of the primary suppliers of Japan's most prized sushi topping. So at this point in our story, sushi had evolved from fermented fish paste that took years to make into a fast, elegant, technically sophisticated cuisine built around fresh fish and vinegared rice. Nigiri, oshizushi, gunkan. There was just one catch. All of it was still, essentially, for people with money. You either had a counter at a traditional sushi restaurant, a skilled chef behind it, and the knowledge to order correctly, or you had nothing. Sushi remained out of reach for most ordinary working people. That changed in 1948, when a restaurant owner in Osaka walked through a beer factory and had the most important idea in the history of sushi. Kaiten Sushi, the beer factory that reinvented dinner. Yoshiaki Shiraishi ran a small sushi stand in Osaka after World War II. Business was decent, but he had a problem that every small restaurant owner has had at some point. He couldn't find enough staff. The hours were brutal, the turnover was constant, and he couldn't keep up with demand on his own. In 1948, he took a tour of the Asahi Brewery in Osaka, one of Japan's major beer producers. Standing on the factory floor, he watched bottles move along a conveyor belt, steady and automatic, from one station to the next, without anyone having to carry them. And he thought, what if the food came to the customer instead of the customer waiting for the food? It took him nearly 10 years to figure out how to make it work. Early conveyor belt prototypes kept jamming at the corners. The belt would bunch up and stop. The fix came from an unexpected direction. Shiraishi was watching someone play cards one afternoon, noticed how the fan of cards curved smoothly around a hand, and realized that if he shaped the individual belt segments like playing cards, wide at one end, narrow at the other, they'd navigate corners without bunching. In April 1958, he opened Mawaru Genroku Sushi in Higashi Osaka. The restaurant had no chairs. Customers stood around a horseshoe-shaped counter, while a 21-meter stainless steel belt circled the kitchen, carrying small plates of sushi at a carefully calculated speed of 8 centimeters per second, fast enough to keep things moving, slow enough that you didn't have to lunge for your food. Shiraishi had spent months testing exactly that speed. 8 centimeters per second. Not 7, not 9. The restaurant was an immediate hit. He franchised the concept, built 250 locations across Japan, and patented the conveyor belt design so that for nearly 20 years, nobody else could legally copy it. Then, in 1970, Shiraishi set up what was essentially a pop-up kaiten restaurant at the Osaka World Expo, an event that drew millions of international visitors. People from across the globe watched sushi move around a belt, grabbed a plate, tried it, and went home talking about it. Kaiten sushi, conveyor belt sushi, rotation sushi, had gone global before most of the world even knew what sushi was. The belt had done something that centuries of tradition hadn't. It made sushi affordable for ordinary people. No reservation required. No chef to impress. No menu to decode. You just sat down, watched the plates go by, took what looked good, and paid for the stack at the end. But the belt had only solved the access problem inside Japan. Getting sushi into America, specifically, getting Americans to eat it, required a completely different kind of invention. Because Americans in the 1960s had one specific issue with sushi that no Japanese chef had anticipated. They were scared of the seaweed. Uramaki, the inside-out roll that conquered America. In the mid-1960s, the little Tokyo neighborhood of Los Angeles had a small cluster of Japanese restaurants. The chefs were Japanese. The fish was good. The sushi was, by any honest measure, the real thing. And most American customers walked in, looked at the menu, ordered something they recognized, and left the raw fish section alone. Part of it was the unfamiliarity with raw fish in general. But there was a specific sticking point that Japanese chefs kept running into. The moment Americans saw a piece of dark, black, slightly shiny dried seaweed wrapped around their food, something switched off. Nori looked strange to an American eye in 1965. It looked like the ocean. It looked like something that had washed up on a shore. One chef, the precise identity is still debated between Ichiro Mashita at a restaurant called Tokyo Kaikan and Ken Sosa at a place called Kinjo on La Cienega Boulevard, decided to just get rid of the visible seaweed. He put the nori on the inside of the roll and moved the rice to the outside. The seaweed was still there. It held everything together, but you couldn't see it. This inside-out roll is called uramaki. And while he was at it, Mashita had another problem. Quality tuna was inconsistent in Los Angeles. So he reached for an avocado, which happened to have a fat, buttery texture remarkably similar to otoro, the fatty tuna belly, combined it with crab, rolled the whole thing in rice, with the seaweed hidden inside, and served it. The California roll had arrived. It contains not one single ingredient that originated in California, and the recipe was invented entirely by Japanese chefs who had never made anything like it in Japan. It is one of the most famous Japanese foods in the world, and is, by every honest measure, an American invention. American customers who wouldn't touch a piece of nigiri ate the California roll without hesitation. The seaweed was hidden. The fish was cooked crab. The avocado felt familiar. It was, in a real sense, a gateway drug. The dish that taught an entire generation of Americans to trust sushi. By 1970, a restaurant called Osho had opened in Hollywood, right next to the 20th Century Fox lot. It attracted the kind of clientele that makes things fashionable fast. Rock Hudson ate there. Audrey Hepburn ate there. Sushi went, almost overnight, from being an exotic food that adventurous people tried once to being what actors and directors ate for lunch. The celebrity factor did something that no amount of marketing could have accomplished on its own. It made sushi aspirational. Today, the most famous sushi restaurant in Los Angeles has no website, no Instagram account, no online reservation system, and a handwritten sign on the door that says, in capital letters, "No California Roll." The place is called Sushi Park, tucked into a strip mall in West Hollywood. Kendall Jenner eats there. Beyoncé eats there. Taylor Swift, who once told an interviewer she couldn't force herself to like sushi, has been photographed eating there. You get a reservation by knowing someone who has the phone number. But none of this, not the California roll, not Sushi Park, not even the conveyor belt, explains how the most popular sushi topping in the world came to exist. Because the most popular topping on Earth, the one that shows up on more sushi menus in more countries than any other ingredient, the one that gave sushi its most recognizable color, was not invented by a Japanese chef. It was not invented by an American chef. It was sold to Japan by a Norwegian marketing team that spent 10 years being laughed out of every meeting they attended. Nigiri salmon, the Norwegian miracle. In 1986, a Norwegian trade official named Bjorn Eirik Olsen flew to Tokyo with a mission that his colleagues thought was slightly delusional. Norway had a problem. In the 1970s, the country had built up a massive commercial salmon farming industry in its cold Atlantic fjords. Norwegian salmon production had grown so fast that the country's industrial freezers were filling up and there was nowhere left to sell the fish. Domestic consumption was flat. European markets were saturated. Japan, meanwhile, was the most lucrative seafood market on Earth. The Japanese would pay 5 times the going rate for sushi-grade fish. And Japan had been overfishing its own waters. The United Nations had started enforcing strict, exclusive economic zones, which meant Japanese fishing fleets couldn't go as far out to sea as they used to. Olsen looked at this situation and thought, Norway has more salmon than it can sell. Japan needs more fish than it has. This should be simple? It was not simple. The first meeting did not go well. Japanese seafood executives listened politely to Olsen's proposal, Norwegian Atlantic salmon for sushi, and then told him, gently but firmly, that it was impossible. Japanese people had eaten salmon for centuries. They knew salmon. And the salmon they knew, Pacific salmon, caught in local waters, carried parasites. Eating it raw would make you sick. That wasn't a rumor. That was established fact. Olsen tried to explain that Norwegian farmed salmon was different. Atlantic salmon, raised in controlled conditions in cold fjords with no parasites, completely safe to eat raw. The executives nodded and showed him the door. He ran advertisements showing Norway's clean, clear ocean water. Nobody responded. He organized a salmon promotion dinner at the Norwegian embassy in Tokyo. Guests ate the salmon politely and said they preferred their fish cooked. He arranged a visit by the Norwegian Crown Prince and Princess to further promote the fish. The Crown Prince came. The fish remained unsold. This went on for 6 years. By 1992, everyone around Olsen was telling him to give up and sell the salmon to the cheaper grilled fish market, where buyers were actually lining up. He refused. He had one idea left. He approached a large Japanese company called Nigiri with an offer that was difficult to turn down. 5,000 metric tons of Norwegian salmon at an almost negligible price. The only condition was that Nigiri could only sell it as sushi, not for grilling, not for smoking. Specifically for raw consumption, Nigiri took the deal. The salmon entered Japanese supermarkets. And then Olsen did something clever that none of his earlier campaigns had thought to do. He didn't call it sake, the Japanese word for salmon, which carried all those years of parasite associations. He called it salmon, a Japanese phonetic version of the English word salmon. A new name, a clean slate. The TV cooking show Iron Chef began featuring it. Celebrity chefs endorsed it. And gradually, then rapidly, Japanese consumers who had never eaten raw salmon in their lives began to discover that Norwegian Atlantic salmon, with its high fat content, its clean flavor, its almost silky texture, was extraordinary. Within a decade, salmon had become the most popular sushi topping in Japan. Today, salmon sushi is the most ordered sushi item on Earth. In Japan, in the United States, in Brazil, in Australia, in France, wherever you find a sushi restaurant, salmon is on the menu. Norway's Atlantic salmon farming industry is now worth roughly $10 billion a year. Olsen, who is now in his 70s, has said in interviews that he never imagined, even in his most optimistic moments, that salmon sushi would become the global phenomenon it turned out to be. The thing that almost every sushi lover on Earth considers the most Japanese of Japanese foods was created by a Norwegian trade official who spent 6 years getting told no. Now, after all that luxury, the auction bluefin, the celebrity omakase, the Norwegian salmon campaign, you might expect the next chapter of sushi history to involve another ingredient that cost a fortune and changed the world. But the next piece of this story is about a sweet little pouch of fried tofu with a name that comes from a Japanese fox spirit. Inari, the fox god Sushi. In the Shinto religion of Japan, the god Inari is the deity of rice, agriculture, and foxes. White foxes, kitsune, are Inari's messengers, and they're believed to have a particular fondness for one food above all others: aburage, deep-fried tofu. So people began leaving aburage as offerings at Inari shrines. And somewhere along the way, someone thought to stuff that fried tofu with vinegared rice, because rice is the whole point of sushi, and called it inarizushi. This is the story behind the sweetest, softest, most low-key piece of sushi on any menu. Inari looks nothing like the rolls or the hand-pressed pieces most people associate with sushi. It's a small golden pouch. The aburage is simmered in a broth of soy sauce, sugar, and dashi until it's glossy and sweet, stuffed with seasoned rice. No fish, no seaweed, no dramatic presentation. It's roughly the shape and size of a small pillow, and it is, by every measure, still sushi. Vinegared rice is in there. That's all it takes. The most famous place to encounter inarizushi is Fushimi Inari Shrine in Kyoto, the one with 10,000 red torii gates winding up through a forested mountain, the one you've probably seen in photographs. Vendors sell inarizushi at the base of the mountain. Visitors buy it as an offering before they climb. The fox statues at the shrine often have small tofu pouches placed at their feet. There's also a long-running regional dispute about the shape of inarizushi that says something very Japanese about regional identity. In eastern Japan, Tokyo's side of the country, inarizushi is made into a pointed triangle shape, like a little pyramid. In western Japan, Osaka and Kyoto, it's rolled into an oval, like a small football. Both sides consider their version correct, and the other version a mild abomination. The debate has been going on for centuries, and shows no sign of resolution. Inarizushi is the sushi you find in a school lunchbox. It doesn't need refrigeration for short periods. It doesn't need chopsticks. It doesn't need any prior knowledge of sushi to eat correctly. If you've ever handed sushi to someone who was nervous about raw fish, inarizushi is the version that actually works. Sweet, soft, friendly, and containing nothing remotely intimidating. But if inarizushi is sushi for the uninitiated, what comes next is sushi for the completely devoted. Omakase, 14 courses and a chef who decides everything. The word is omakase. It means, literally, I leave it up to you. You walk into the restaurant, usually a small room, usually a counter with maybe 8 to 12 seats, and you tell the chef that you're trusting him completely. No menu, no modifications, no requesting that he skip the sea urchin. He decides what you eat, in what order, at what pace. The omakase experience is structured like a piece of music. It starts quiet, light, delicate white fish that's low in fat, high in texture. Then it builds. Richer fish, fattier cuts, more complex flavors, and it ends with something sweet and simple, usually tamago, a slightly sweetened egg that's been cooked slowly in a rectangular pan and served at room temperature. Every piece is made to order, seconds before it reaches you. The chef watches you eat. He adjusts the next piece based on what he sees, how quickly you ate the last one, whether you seem to want something lighter or heavier, what the freshest ingredient in the kitchen is at that exact moment. The most famous omakase chef alive is Jiro Ono, and he is 96 years old and still working. His restaurant, Sukiyabashi Jiro, is in the Ginza district of Tokyo. It has 10 seats. It has 3 Michelin stars, the highest rating the Guide Awards. Reservations are typically booked 2 to 3 months in advance, and a meal costs somewhere between $300 and $400 per person. There is no menu. There is no a la carte option. There is no vegetarian substitution available. In 2011, a documentary called Jiro Dreams of Sushi followed Jiro through a single year of work. It showed him waking before dawn, going to Toyosu Market to personally select fish, returning to prep, opening the restaurant, serving 20-minute omakase experiences to 10 guests at a time, then starting over. The film made him an international figure and a kind of shorthand for what it looks like when someone has devoted an entire life to a single craft. Jiro has said, in interviews, that he spent 10 years learning to press rice correctly. Then another 10 years learning to slice fish. He still, at 96, considers himself to be improving. In 2014, President Barack Obama visited Tokyo for a diplomatic summit with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. For their private dinner, Abe chose Sukiyabashi Jiro. The two leaders ate a 20-course omakase sitting next to each other at the 10-seat counter, while Jiro made each piece in front of them. Afterward, Abe described it as the best meal of his life. The restaurant's booking list immediately extended to 6 months. One note about wasabi, since omakase is where you're most likely to encounter the real thing. 99% of the wasabi served in sushi restaurants worldwide, including most restaurants in Japan, is not actually wasabi. It's a blend of horseradish and mustard paste that's been dyed green. Real wasabi, Wasabia japonica, grows in cold mountain streams, takes 2 years to mature, and costs around $160 per kilogram. It's so scarce that even many high-end Tokyo sushi restaurants can't get it consistently. When you're at an omakase counter and the chef reaches for a fresh green root and begins grating it against a shark skin grater right in front of you, that's when you know you're in the right place. Omakase is sushi at its most intense, the most personal, the most expensive, the most demanding. But for most people in Japan, sushi isn't an event. It's Tuesday night. It's what's in the fridge. It's what you make with whatever's around. And for those nights, there's chirashi. Chirashi, sushi, for a Tuesday night in March. The name means scattered. That's the whole description. Chirashi is a bowl of vinegared sushi rice, with toppings scattered across the surface. Whatever you have, whatever's fresh, arranged however you feel like arranging it. Sashimi-grade fish is common in restaurant versions. Pickled vegetables, thin-sliced egg crepe, edamame, cucumber, ginger, all of these show up in home versions. The bowl looks different every time someone makes it, because there's no fixed recipe. That's sort of the point. It's the sushi you make when you don't feel like rolling anything or shaping anything. No mat, no mold, no 10-second technique. You cook the rice, season it, pour it into a bowl, and put stuff on top. A child can make chirashi. An exhausted parent at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night can make chirashi. The most important day for chirashi in Japan is March 3rd, Hinamatsuri, the doll festival. It's a celebration for young girls, involving elaborate displays of ornamental dolls representing the imperial court. The traditional meal for Hinamatsuri is chirashi, made as colorful and as decorative as possible. Bright orange salmon roe, yellow egg, green peas, pink shrimp, all arranged to look like spring. For millions of Japanese families, chirashi is the taste of that holiday. It's the thing kids remember their mothers making. Here's the detail that surprises most people outside Japan. The most common version of chirashi, eaten in Japanese homes, doesn't actually contain fish. The restaurant version, the one with gorgeous slices of tuna and salmon fanned across the rice, is designed to justify a restaurant price. At home, chirashi is often made with pickled vegetables, seasoned tofu, thin egg strips, and pickled ginger. Clean, simple, affordable, and not at all raw. The idea that all Japanese sushi involves raw fish is one of those assumptions that holds up fine in a restaurant but falls apart completely the moment you eat at someone's kitchen table in Tokyo. From the bowl, we move to the cone. Because one of the most beloved forms of sushi in Japan is also the one with the most unforgiving deadline. Temaki. You have 3 minutes. Temaki is a hand roll, a sheet of dried seaweed, nori, shaped into a cone, packed with rice and whatever filling you like, and held in one hand while you eat it. No cutting, no chopsticks. You just bite into the whole thing. The name means hand roll, and the tradition is that you eat it with your hands, which sometimes surprises people who've been using chopsticks all night. But this is, actually, closer to how sushi was always meant to be eaten. Nigiri, those hand-pressed rice and fish pieces, was originally street food. You picked it up with your fingers. Chopsticks for sushi are largely a Western adaptation, something that happened when sushi moved into formal restaurant settings outside Japan. Temaki has one rule that no other sushi has. Eat it immediately. Nori absorbs moisture from the rice at a remarkable rate. Within about 3 minutes of a temaki being rolled, the seaweed starts to soften. Within 5 minutes, it goes limp. The crisp, papery snap of fresh nori becomes something more like wet construction paper. The structural integrity of the cone collapses. The whole experience is ruined. This is why, at a temaki-focused restaurant in Japan, the server will tell you to eat each piece within 2 minutes of receiving it. Not as a suggestion, as an instruction. Temaki parties, where a group of people gathers around a table covered in ingredients and everyone rolls their own, are one of the most common ways to entertain at home in Japan. You lay out nori sheets, a bowl of sushi rice, sliced fish, avocado, cucumber, maybe some pickled plum. Everyone rolls their own cone. Everyone eats it immediately. There's no chef. There's no skill required. The conversation happens in the brief window between rolling and eating, which turns out to be a pretty good structure for a dinner party. At any temaki party, there's always someone who rolls their cone too slowly, gets distracted talking, and then bites into a sad, soft, collapsed nori cylinder. The group notices. It becomes part of the evening's story. Maki, the one the whole world thinks is real. Sushi. If you asked 1,000 people outside Japan to describe sushi, most of them would describe maki. A cylinder of rice and filling, wrapped in seaweed, sliced into 6 or 8 small rounds. It's the image that comes up when someone says the word. It's what's in every grocery store sushi case, every airport food court, every party platter in the Western Hemisphere. The history of maki is, in a way, the opposite of omakase. Where omakase demands that you surrender completely to a chef's judgment, maki was designed to require no chef at all. In the early 20th century, sushi was still largely confined to restaurants, sit-down places with real chefs and real counters. The problem was that the people who most needed an affordable, filling meal, factory workers, day laborers, anyone who needed to eat quickly and get back to work, couldn't always sit down and wait for a chef to hand-press their food. Maki solved that. You could make a large quantity in advance. You could wrap it tightly, and it would hold its shape. You could cut it into pieces and carry it in a box. It was, essentially, the first sushi you could pack into a lunch. In modern Japan, the most culturally significant maki moment happens once a year, on Setsubun, the first day of spring, by the traditional calendar, usually February 3rd or 4th. On Setsubun, the tradition is to eat an entire futomaki roll, a thick roll, about the diameter of a small flashlight, in a single sitting, without cutting it, without talking, with your eyes closed, facing the lucky compass direction for the current year. The uncut roll is called ehomaki, which translates roughly to lucky direction roll. Cutting it is considered bad luck. You'd be cutting through your good fortune for the year. Speaking while eating it means you've broken your concentration and the wish doesn't count. Japanese supermarkets sell tens of millions of ehomaki in the days leading up to Setsubun. Lines form outside convenience stores at midnight on the holiday. For one day, the most important thing about maki is not how it tastes, but which direction you're facing when you eat it. And there's one thing that professional sushi chefs will tell you about maki that the grocery store cases don't make obvious. Making it correctly is genuinely difficult. A proper hosomaki, a thin roll with a single filling, requires rice, distributed in a perfectly even layer, with no air pockets, nori that stays dry during the rolling process, and a single, clean, decisive cut with a very sharp knife. Sushi chefs in Japan typically spend at least 2 years practicing maki before they're considered ready to sell it. The fact that it looks simple is part of the craft. Outro. Nobody owns sushi. Step back and look at the full picture. Nare-zushi began in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Laos, Myanmar, as a preservation technique. It traveled through China before anyone in Japan ever tasted it. Oshizushi was refined by Osaka merchants who needed something they could put in a box and sell on the go. Nigiri was invented by a guy running a food stall on a riverbank in 1824. The conveyor belt came from an Asahi beer factory. The California roll was invented in Los Angeles by Japanese chefs trying to hide the seaweed from customers who didn't trust it. Salmon sushi was invented by a Norwegian trade official who spent 6 years being told it was impossible. Inari got its name from a fox deity. And omakase, the most revered, most expensive, most intimate form of sushi in existence, is practiced most famously by a 96-year-old man in a 10-seat room in Tokyo, who still considers himself a work in progress. There is no other food on earth with a biography this strange. Sushi is routinely described as one of Japan's great cultural exports, and it is. But what the story actually shows is something more interesting than that. Every step in sushi's evolution was a response to a problem. How do you keep fish from spoiling? How do you feed people faster? How do you get Americans to eat seaweed? How do you sell 5,000 metric tons of Norwegian salmon to a market that's rejecting you? The answers, over 12 centuries, came from farmers and fishermen, and merchant-class Osaka traders, and Hollywood restaurant owners, and Scandinavian marketing teams, and a chef who once watched someone play cards and had an idea about corners. Sushi doesn't belong to Japan. It doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to whoever was hungry enough to figure out the next step.